Are you employed, ma'am?
Yes.
How are you employed?
I'm a forensic toxicologist with NMS Labs.
How long have you been a forensic toxicologist?
Over 20 years.
And with NMS?
I've been with NMS since June of 2021.
Okay. So you were working there in March of 2022?
Correct.
Okay. What is a forensic toxicologist?
Forensic toxicology, you analyze biological samples for the presence or absence of drugs and alcohol.
And what is your education, briefly?
I received my bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse in 1997, a master's degree in forensic science from the University of Illinois at Chicago in 1999, and a PhD in toxicology from the University of Georgia in 2007.
Since becoming a forensic toxicologist 20 years ago, have you had training, continuous training?
Yes, so throughout my career, I've received training specific to the chemical extractions that are to be performed on the biological samples, the instrumentation that's used for the analysis, and then also pharmacology for the interpretation of the drug and ethanol results and how they might apply to either impairment or a medical legal death investigation.
So have you had a chance to, this is kind of a funny question, have you had a chance to check the data from biological samples?
Yes.
About how many times have you done that?
So my primary job duty is case review. So on average, I probably review 12,000 cases a year with NMS Labs.
And have you ever testified before as an expert in a criminal case?
Yes, I have.
About how many times?
Approximately 160.
How does the toxicology process work? I mean, how do you get it, at whose request, and what happens to it?
So NMS receives samples from various clients like medical examiners, coroners, law enforcement, hospitals. So we receive the evidence and the client will request specific testing to be performed.
And you said they come from all over the country?
Correct.
And so how do they get there?
So they can be shipped via FedEx, UPS, hand delivery, U.S. mail.
Then once they arrive at NMS, what happens to the sample?
We have a specimen processing department that will open up the packaging, compare the evidence against the information that was provided by the client on a request form to make sure that the information matches. And then we create our own unique case. We have an electronic laboratory information management system where we'll input all the information provided to us, what testing was requested, and then we give each case a unique 8-digit number that we barcode. So all of the evidence is barcoded so it can be tracked throughout the time in the laboratory.
Once they receive it and process it as you've just described, then is it secured someplace?
Yes, so it's a secure facility in general, and then so the building is secure, and then the laboratory also has limited access to the people that need to use the laboratory, and then where the evidence is stored in like walk-in freezers or fridges, that also requires like a prox card access. So it's secure and then limited to staff that need access to those areas.
So when it comes to testing, what happens, we heard about some gray vials and stuff, for example. What happens to how does it get into the laboratory?
So for this case, we received 2 blood samples. They were both in gray top vials. So each vial is going to get its own unique barcode number. And then when testing is going to be performed, we will take out a small volume of blood that's needed for the test. So we have the original container that was received, and we just remove out or aliquot the amount of volume that's needed for the test. And then, that's placed into a clean new test tube that also is barcoded and tracked.
Then this aliquot is forwarded to the lab for the scientist to run through the instruments?
Yes, so the aliquot is given to a staff member who will perform the specific test following a standardized operating procedure.
Okay. Is it run by itself or in batches of cases?
So we run batches, so there's going to be many other unknown case samples, and then also every batch will have a set of standards and controls that is also run concurrently with the unknown cases.
So when the instrument runs its test on any particular sample, how is the data entered?
So everything is being tracked by that unique case number that we gave it. Once an extraction is performed, the sample is run on an instrument. The instrument has inputted, like they scan the barcode to tell the instrument this is, this vial is this case number. After the data is reviewed, it's sent electronically from the instrument to our electronic laboratory information management system that stores the results. So it's always just following our unique case number.
Is there someone near in time who then reviews that data to make sure that it was processed properly?
Yes, so after the person in the laboratory performs their procedure, it runs on an instrument. When the instrument is done running the entire batch, someone's going to review all of the data for the knowns to make sure that the positive controls were positive, the negatives were negative, and then that all of the unknown cases, that any results that were found meet the acceptance criteria for reporting. So they'll look at the batch in its entirety to make sure that it's acceptable based on those standards and controls. And then when they're done, a second person is going to do the exact same thing. So it's like a double check of their work before that batch is released and those results sent to the computer system.
And that's the same process for each test that you run on all the various substances?
Correct.
Okay. When do you come into the picture?
So after all testing has been completed for a case, then in my role as a toxicologist, I'm going to review the data from all of the testing that was performed for this specific case. I also have access to the administrative information provided by the client on that request form, so I'm making sure that the correct testing was performed that was requested. So I review everything, and then I will issue a final toxicology report with the findings from all of the testing.
So in this particular case, you received some samples from the Utah Medical Examiner on March 8th?
Correct.
Okay, and it was assigned the unique number at that point?
Correct.
And what did you receive?
We received 2 tubes of blood, vitreous fluid, urine, liver tissue, and gastric fluid.
Okay. And initially, what were you asked to do?
Initially, it was just requested that we perform a test that screens for alcohol and drugs in one of the blood samples.
And did you do that?
Yes.
Okay. In the screening, were any of those? Did any of those come up positive for substances that you subsequently tested a confirmatory test?
Yes.
Okay. And tell the jury about that.
So we first perform a broad drug screen that looks for hundreds of different drugs. And then based on those results, if there's any positive findings, then we will perform a second confirmation test that's more specific and sensitive for that drug or drug class. And so that's, we're taking a separate aliquot, performing a separate test, running on another instrument to confirm those original screening results.
And in this case, what did you find in the confirmatory test?
fentanyl and norfentanyl.
Okay, and did the confirmatory test identify levels?
Yes, so fentanyl was reported at 15 nanograms per milliliter and norfentanyl at 3.3 nanograms per milliliter.
What is norfentanyl?
Norfentanyl is a metabolite of fentanyl. So when your body is trying to eliminate drugs, they'll break them down into a different form called metabolites sometime that are easier for the body to excrete. So it's inactive, it doesn't cause any effects, but it just shows that some fentanyl has been metabolized to norfentanyl.
Did you screen for hydrocodone?
Yes.
And did the screen identify anything for further testing?
No.
Okay. Any other opioids tested in the screening?
Yes.
And any others besides fentanyl positive for further testing?
No.
Do you know how long hydrocodone stays in the body that you're able to find it in the subsequent toxicology test?
So hydrocodone has a half-life of maybe 4 to 6 hours. So a half-life refers to how long does it take for the concentration to go in half. And usually drugs will be completely eliminated from your body in 5 half-lives. So if someone took a dose of hydrocodone, we would expect it all to be eliminated within 20 to 30 hours based on that 4 to 6 hour half-life times 5.
Okay. When a person dies, does it freeze in place whatever is there? I mean, you don't continue to eliminate it, or it doesn't evaporate once the blood is drawn out. It freezes it in place. Is that correct?
In general, it's going to be a snapshot of what was going on. There are some drugs that might have limited stability, like cocaine can be broken down after death just due to enzymes that are present that can break it down into its metabolite. So there are a few drugs that we know have limited stability in the biological samples after death, but for the most part, yes, it's, your body has stopped working, like it's no longer going to be metabolizing, etc.
Is that true for opioids then?
That it should be a snapshot of them, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Have you ever heard of a principle or a theory or something called postmortem redistribution?
Yes.
Can you give a brief explanation of what that is?
So postmortem redistribution, so after someone dies, the pH of your blood starts to change and the permeability of the tissues isn't maintained the same. So it means if there was like drugs stored in like major organs like your heart or your lungs, they might start to seep out of those organs and go into the neighboring blood. And so this means like they're being redistributed. So maybe there was a concentration of drugs in your heart, and now after death, due to the changes the body might be undergoing, they might go into the blood and increase the concentration. So the blood might not be, the concentration that's there might not be an exact representation of the concentration at the time right before death, right? So it might have increased due to the tissues releasing some of their drug stores into that blood sample.
When you obtain the blood, when the person, the OME or whomever is obtaining the blood, does it, after death, does it matter where they obtain it from with regards to this redistribution?
Post-mortem redistribution should occur less if you take from a peripheral blood source like the femoral vein, because those veins aren't as close to the major organs, versus if you take blood from a central source like a cardiac, that is closer to your heart and all of the other organs. So it's more likely to have postmortem redistribution in a central blood source compared to a peripheral, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen in a peripheral blood source.
Okay. So, does the literature say, identify what is a lethal dose of fentanyl?
So studies are published that provide concentrations of drugs found where it's been determined that fentanyl contributed to the death. So there are studies that give these concentration ranges, yes.
And does it vary from person to person?
Yes, so based on an individual's history of use with the drug, they might have a tolerance to it, which means that you might need a higher concentration to obtain the same desired effect. And it also means that you might need a higher concentration from someone, a chronic user, compared to a naive user for that drug to cause their death. So it can vary what is a lethal concentration for individual to individual.
For a person who has never taken fentanyl before, what is the literature say is a lethal dose?
So just in general, the lowest reported concentrations of fentanyl are 3 nanograms per milliliter, where it's been contributed to their death.
Okay, so in this case we had 15.
Correct.
Which is 5 times that.
Correct.
Okay. Now, even assuming this redistribution, postmortem redistribution, is that significantly still above this 3 nanograms per milliliter?
Yes, 15 is greater than 3.
Thank you. I am just a lawyer, so pardon my math. Okay, at a later time, were you asked to examine other of the samples that you were sent by the Utah Medical Examiner?
Yes, in October of 2022, the client requested that we perform an alcohol and drug screen on the gastric fluid.
And did you do that?
Yes.
Did, following that screen, did you get positive results for which you subsequently performed confirmatory tests?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell us about those?
Yes, so ethanol was detected at 279 milligrams per deciliter. Quetiapine was detected at 16,000 nanograms per milliliter. Fentanyl was detected at 20,000 nanograms per milliliter. Norfentanyl was detected at 52 nanograms per milliliter, and acetylfentanyl was detected at 29 nanograms per milliliter.
We haven't heard about acetylfentanyl. What is that?
Acetylfentanyl is a fentanyl analog, so it's similar in structure, but it's an illicit drug. So there's no prescription pharmaceutical drug where it's going to be prescribed. It's solely illicit, and it's often seen in illicitly manufactured fentanyl as a co-product.
So for purposes of an analyst or a criminal investigator, that would be a marker that this came from a source, this fentanyl came from a source that was illicit?
You could provide that interpretation, yes.
Okay.
I mean, they could have just had acetylfentanyl and maybe a fentanyl prescription, but often when you see acetylfentanyl, it's an indication that the fentanyl was illicit.
Okay. This 279 milligrams per deciliter of ethanol, I want to go into that. First of all, how much alcohol is that in layman's terms, like in order of say, shots of liquor or 12-ounce beers or whatever?
So this will be kind of a multi-step answer. So the 279 milligrams per deciliter is a concentration. And so your question was asking just about milligrams. So like if you have a beer or a shot of alcohol, that's just in terms of milligrams of ethanol. So to figure that out, you would have to take the 279 times the total volume of gastric fluid that's available.
Were you made aware of the total volume?
Yes, I was.
From whom?
Dr. Ulmer,
Okay. And did she give you a figure?
700 milliliters.
Okay. And so from that, you were able to make a calculation?
Yeah, so you would multiply the 279 times the 700 milliliters and doing the conversions for deciliters to milliliters, but you end up with around 1,900 milligrams of ethanol versus a standard drink of ethanol is 14,000 milligrams. So it's well below the amount that you would find just in one standard drink of ethanol.
Is there another possible source for this alcohol than alcoholic beverage?
Yes, so it's known that if you have a source of glucose and bacteria, that ethanol can be formed post-mortem. So the bacteria convert glucose, because it's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like ethanol. It can convert glucose into ethanol. And so obviously, like in gastric contents, you might have a source of glucose if there's food there, and then your stomach naturally has bacteria. So this postmortem formation can occur either in the body prior to sample collection, but it could also happen in the collection container because often they don't have a preservative that would inhibit the bacteria from doing this process of postmortem formation of ethanol.
Is there any way you can chemically identify whether it's this postmortem decomposition or vodka?
Not in the testing that we performed.
Okay. Can you tell us, based on your knowledge of the volume in the gastric fluid, anything about this quetiapine and how much of a pill, if you will, would be there, or a dosage?
Right. So again, you would take the concentration, the 16,000 nanograms per milliliter, multiply it times the total 700 milliliters, and you get a very large number, but drugs are given typically in milligram doses, and there's 1 million nanograms in 1 milligram, right? So after you do that math, it ends up being 11 milligrams of quetiapine. I just want to state, like, the assumption is that 700 milliliters of gastric was homogeneous, so that the concentration was consistent throughout the entire volume, and that the sample that was sent to us represents that 700 milliliters as a whole. Like, that assumption has to be made for the calculations that I'm providing.
And so is it that 16,000 come to equal a standard dosage, prescription dosage?
I would say it's less than a standard dosage. I mean, it depends on a person's prescription, but typically like 75, 100, 250 milligrams of quetiapine might be prescribed versus our calculation was 11 milligrams.
Okay. Did you, a few minutes ago, did you have an opportunity to look at State's Exhibit 9-1, a quetiapine bottle with its label on it?
Yes, I did.
Okay. You also have the results that you obtained through screening and your confirmation test. With the knowns that you have available to you, are you able to say that that the quetiapine and fentanyl had to have been taken sequentially, either one before the other one, or at the same time, or anything like that?
I cannot make any of those conclusions.
Okay. I have nothing for this witness.
Ms. Lewis.